I have been driving trucks for 20 years. I have put over 2.5 million miles on various rigs across this country. I have driven through every state in the continental United States. I have driven through blizzards, through flash floods, through dust storms so thick they turned noon into midnight. I have seen accidents, wildfires from a distance, and a sky full of northern lights somewhere on a dark highway in Montana that I will never forget as long as I live. But none of that is why I'm here right now. I'm here because of the other stuff. The things I've seen on the road at 3 in the morning that I couldn't explain then and can't explain now. The things that happened in rest areas and on mountain passes and on empty 2-lane blacktop roads in the middle of nowhere that I've told exactly 4 people about in 20 years, and 2 of those people were my wife and my brother, and one of them stopped asking me about it after the first conversation, and the other one told me I needed to get more sleep. I'm not a person who goes looking for this kind of thing. I don't watch ghost hunting shows. I'm not particularly spiritual or religious. I'm a practical man. I believe in physics and mechanics and what I can see and touch and measure. That's what 20 years of maintaining your own equipment will do to you. You become a very concrete thinker. Which is exactly why what I'm about to tell you has stayed with me the way it has. Because I don't want these experiences to be real. I have no reason to fabricate them and every reason to explain them away. I've tried. I've tried hard. Some of them I've managed to rationalize, at least partially. Others I cannot. Not with any explanation that satisfies me. So here it is. In order, more or less, over 20 years. The things I've seen on the road that I cannot explain. Make of it what you will. I'm just the driver. The first time something happened that I couldn't explain, I had been driving professionally for 4 months. I was 22 years old, running a regional circuit through Ohio and Kentucky, and I was still green enough that I was jumpy about everything. Every noise from the trailer, every shimmy in the steering at highway speed, every car that came up fast behind me in the dark. It was a Tuesday night in late October. I was on I-71 South, somewhere between Columbus and Cincinnati, about 2 in the morning. Traffic was sparse. The kind of sparse where you can go 3 or 4 minutes without seeing another vehicle in either direction. I had my headlights on, the radio low, and I was doing about 62. About a quarter mile ahead, I could see an overpass coming up. A rural overpass, just a county road crossing the interstate, no lights on it, just concrete in the dark. And standing on the railing of that overpass, on the outside of the railing, was a woman. I want to be precise about this because the detail matters. She wasn't standing on the sidewalk of the overpass. She was standing on the outer edge of the railing, on the traffic side, facing me. Her arms were at her sides. She was wearing what looked like a white dress, which struck me even in that first second as strange because it was October and it was cold. Her hair was dark and long and loose and moving slightly, though I couldn't feel any wind inside the cab. My first thought was, someone is about to jump. I hit my horn, long blast, the way you do, and I reached for my CB to call it in. And as I drove under the overpass, I looked up through the windshield. At that angle, briefly, you can see the underside of the bridge and some of the road above it. I didn't see her on the bridge anymore. I didn't see her falling. I pulled over about 300 yards past the overpass, which takes a moment in a loaded truck, and I got out and I looked back. There was nobody on that overpass. Nobody on the road above it. Nobody in the grass on either side of the interstate. I sat there with the door open and the dome light on for probably 10 minutes. I called the county non-emergency line and told them I thought I'd seen a person standing on an overpass railing and gave them the location. They said they'd check it out. I drove the rest of that night with the radio off and both hands on the wheel and every light in the cab turned on. I never heard any follow-up. No news report of anyone jumping from an overpass on that stretch of I-71 that night. No police callback. Nothing. Which I've thought about a lot over the years, and which I still don't have an explanation for. I want to be very clear up front that I have never picked up a hitchhiker in 20 years of driving. It's a firm policy, both personal and company in most cases, and it is one I have never broken. So what I'm about to tell you is not a story about making a bad decision. It's a story about something that happened without me doing anything at all. Year 2. I was running a load from Albuquerque to El Paso. Night run, which I preferred in the desert because the heat during the day on that stretch is brutal on the engine if you're running loaded. It was well after midnight, no other traffic, just me and the dark and the high desert landscape on either side of US 25. About 40 miles south of Truth or Consequences, I noticed something on the side of the road ahead. A figure, standing at the edge of the shoulder, facing the road, one arm out. Hitchhiking. Standard pose. And I want to tell you my first reaction was irritation more than anything else, because hitchhiking in the middle of the night in the desert on a federal highway is a genuinely dangerous thing to do, and I never quite understand why people do it. As I got closer, I could make out more detail. Male figure, or it appeared male, tall, wearing dark clothing. The arm was extended with the thumb out, classic hitchhike stance. And he was just standing there as I approached at highway speed, not stepping back from the road, not flinching as my headlights hit him. I passed him. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down significantly. And I looked in my driver's side mirror immediately after passing, the way you do, reflexively. There was nobody there. Not stepping back from the road. Not walking away into the desert. Not visible at all in my mirrors, which on a straight flat highway at that point should have shown me a figure for at least another quarter mile. The shoulder was empty. The road behind me was empty. The desert on both sides, lit by my running lights for a good distance, was empty. I drove to El Paso. I delivered the load. I didn't sleep well for 3 days. What I've read since, and I'm not someone who reads a lot about this kind of thing, is that the desert Southwest has a significant number of accounts from drivers and travelers about roadside figures that aren't there when you pass them. There's folklore about it. There are Native American stories that address this specific phenomenon, though I am not the right person to speak to those in detail. What I can tell you is that I saw something, and then I didn't, and the distance was too close and the light was too clear for it to have been a shadow or an animal. Rest stops at 3 in the morning are their own kind of place. If you've spent any time in them, you know, the light is always too harsh or not quite bright enough. There's always a sound you can't place. The combination of artificial light and deep dark beyond the trees makes everything feel like a stage set. A poorly designed one. I've never been entirely comfortable in rest stops at night, and after year 3, I've been a lot less comfortable. It was September. I was eastbound on I-40 in Arkansas, and I needed to stop. Not for my clock, just physiologically, the way you do after 8 hours of driving and several cups of truck stop coffee. I pulled into a rest area somewhere between Fort Smith and Little Rock, one of those older facilities, brick building, covered walkway, mature trees all around it that make the area feel enclosed. It was 3 in the morning, and I was the only truck in the lot. There were 2 cars parked at the far end, which I barely registered. I climbed down, used the facilities, came back out. And then I stopped walking. About 30 yards away, near the far edge of the parking lot where it met the tree line, there was a child standing and looking at me. I want to tell you how I know it was a child. The height. The proportions. The way children stand, which is different from the way adults stand, a certain looseness in the posture, a slight forward lean. This figure was unambiguously a child. 6 or 7 years old, maybe. Standing completely still. At 3 in the morning. At a rest stop. Alone. My immediate response was concern. A lost child, A child whose family had made a stop and somehow left without them, some kind of emergency. I took a few steps toward the figure, and I called out something like, "Hey, are you okay? Are you lost? Is someone with you?" The standard things you'd say. The child didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there, facing me, at 30 yards distance. And the longer I looked, the more something felt wrong about it. Not wrong in a way I can fully put into words. Wrong in the way that your body knows something before your brain does. Every hair on my arms stood up. I am not someone who gets that feeling easily. I got it then. I backed up slowly toward my truck. I kept my eyes on the figure. It didn't move. I got to the cab, climbed in, locked the door, started the engine, and left that rest area. I checked my mirrors all the way to the exit. The figure never moved from the spot it had been standing in. It was still there, still facing the direction I'd been, when I lost sight of it. I've told myself 100 explanations. A child whose parents were in the building and who had wandered out. A sleepwalking child. A shadow that resolved into a shape in the harsh rest stop lighting. Every explanation has a problem with it that I can't get past. The stillness. The silence. The fact that no adult came running after a child that age standing alone in a dark parking lot at 3 in the morning. I still don't stop at that rest area. This one is different from the others because it doesn't involve something I saw. It involves something I heard. And I know how that sounds. I know the easy explanations: radio interference, crossed signals, fatigue-induced auditory distortion. I've run through all of them. Year 4. Late November. I was westbound on I-80 in Wyoming, which is one of the most desolate stretches of highway in the country. Beautiful in a hard, specific way, but desolate. It's the kind of road where you can go 20 minutes without passing anything except wind turbines and antelope and the occasional rancher's fence line disappearing into the distance. The weather was bad, not shut down the highway bad, but cold and gusty, and the kind of wind that tries to get under your trailer and redistribute your whole rig across 3 lanes if you're not paying attention. I had the AM radio on, which I used to do on overnight runs in that part of the country because AM carries farther at night, weird atmospheric physics, and you could pick up talk radio out of Denver or Salt Lake that would at least give you voices to push back against the silence. Somewhere around 2:30 in the morning, the station I was listening to faded out, replaced by static. I started scanning, and between stations, in the static, I heard a voice. Not music, not another program bleeding through. A voice. A man's voice, low and flat, speaking slowly. And what he was saying, I'm going to tell you exactly what I heard, and you can make of it what you will, was, "Don't stop between the markers. Don't stop between the markers. If you see the lights on the right side, do not stop. Do not get out. Keep driving until the town." It repeated. 3 times that I heard it, the same words, the same flat tone, the same rhythm. Then static. Then a country station out of Rollins came in clear and clean, and that was it. I didn't stop between any markers. I kept my eyes on the left side of the road, specifically, I am not sure why. I drove until I hit the next town, which was Rollins. I parked at a truck stop, sat in my cab with the lights on, and wrote down exactly what I'd heard in the back of a receipt I had in the cup holder. I have that receipt. I've kept it in my logbook wallet for 16 years. The writing is in my handwriting, written right after it happened, and it says exactly what I just told you. I never found any explanation for what that transmission was. I've looked. There's no emergency broadcast format that matches it. There's no radio program I've ever found that uses that specific phrasing. The stretch of I-80 in Wyoming has a complicated history. It's one of the deadliest interstates in the country for weather-related accidents, And before the highway was built, that land has its own long history that I won't pretend to understand. Whatever it was, I did what it said. And nothing happened to me that night except a bad cup of coffee in Rollins and a fitful 4 hours of sleep in the bunk. By year 5 I was running OTR, coast to coast, and I developed the thick skin that long-haul driving requires. The nights didn't bother me the way they had in year 1. The empty roads felt comfortable more often than they felt threatening. I'd filed away the things that had happened without a satisfying explanation and given them a kind of mental folder labeled "Deal with Later," which is where they still mostly live. And then came the night in Oregon that opened that folder back up. I was southbound on US 97, coming down from the Columbia River toward Bend. It was mid-October, clear night, no weather, no traffic. I'd been on this road for about an hour with nothing behind me when I checked my mirrors and noticed a pair of headlights, maybe a mile back. Nothing unusual. Traffic happens, even at 2 in the morning on a rural highway. Over the next 15 minutes, those headlights didn't get closer and didn't fall further back. They maintained exactly the same distance, which you'd think would be explainable. Someone just happens to be doing the same speed as me. Except I changed my speed. I dropped down to 50 to see if they'd close the gap. They dropped to 50. I came back up to 65. They came back up to 65. The distance never changed. The lights never moved from that position in my mirrors. I pulled off at a wide spot near a junction, a full stop, engine running, hazards on, and I watched the road behind me. The headlights approached. They were about 200 yards away when I stopped, and I expected them to continue past me. They slowed. They stopped. On the highway. A pair of headlights, just sitting there in the dark road behind me, not pulled to the shoulder, just stopped in the lane. I sat there with my heart going faster than I'd care to admit. I couldn't see the vehicle behind the lights. No cab silhouette, no marker lights, no clearance lights that would identify it as another truck. Just 2 white headlights sitting in the dark about 200 yards behind me. I pulled out. The headlights followed. Same distance. I ran that stretch all the way to a gas station on the outskirts of Bend, pulled in hard, parked at the pump, got out of the cab, and turned to watch the road. No headlights. No vehicle coming down the highway. Nothing. I went inside and asked the attendant if they'd seen anything come past in the last few minutes. Kid looked at me like I was speaking a language he didn't know. I bought coffee I didn't drink and sat in the lot for 45 minutes before I could make myself get back on the road. Louisiana at 4 in the morning is a specific kind of environment that I think has to be experienced to be fully appreciated. The swamps sit close to the road on certain stretches of I-10 and US 90. The fog comes off the water in thick, low layers that your headlights can't fully penetrate. The cypress trees visible through the mist look like they were put there by someone who wanted the scenery to feel old and watchful. It is beautiful and it is deeply strange, and I have never been entirely comfortable driving through it in the dark. Year 6, mid-August. I was eastbound on US 90 near the Atchafalaya Basin, running a load from Texas toward New Orleans. The fog was heavy, visibility maybe 300 feet, and I had slowed to a cautious speed because this road has no shoulder to speak of in certain sections and the drainage ditches on either side are significant. In the fog ahead of me, something was walking on the road. I saw it gradually as I came up on it, the way you sometimes see things in fog before you can fully resolve what they are. It was tall, very tall, 7 feet, maybe more. It was walking in the center of the right lane, moving in the same direction I was driving, and I was gaining on it fast because it was moving slowly. I went to the brakes. I watched it as I slowed, and the more clearly I could see it through the fog as the distance closed, the more wrong it looked. The proportions were off. The limbs were too long. The way it moved had a quality I can only describe as slightly incorrect, like watching footage of something moving that's been subtly altered, that your eye keeps trying to fix and can't. And it was dark. Not dark like a person in dark clothing. Dark like an absence. Like a shape cut out of the space in front of me. I stopped the truck. Full stop. About 50 feet behind it. It stopped walking. It didn't turn around. It just stopped. I sat there in the cab with every light on inside and outside, my hand on the horn, my foot on the brake, my eyes locked on that shape in the fog. I do not know how long I sat there. It felt like several minutes. At some point, the fog shifted, or thickened, or something changed about the light, and the shape was gone. Not gone like it walked away. Gone like a projector was switched off. I drove through that section of road at about 40 miles an hour with my four-ways on and my hand near the horn, and I did not breathe normally until I could see the lights of Morgan City in the distance. I have never told a dispatcher why I was late on that delivery. I put it down to fog conditions, which was true as far as it went. Truckers use the CB radio on Channel 19 for road condition reports, warnings about law enforcement, weather ahead, and the general running commentary of life on the highway. If you've spent any time around the CB culture, you know it can be crude and funny and occasionally useful and occasionally completely useless. But it is a human thing. The voices on Channel 19 are the voices of other drivers, of people you share the road with, of a community that's rough around the edges but real. Which is why what I heard on the CB in Year 7 in Nebraska was so specifically unsettling. It was February. I was westbound on I-80, which in Nebraska in February is an experience that tests your commitment to the profession. The temperature was minus 11 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind was coming out of the northwest at 35 miles an hour with gusts higher. The road was clear. They were good about keeping I-80 in Nebraska plowed and salted, but the wind was making the drive genuinely demanding. I was the only truck I could see in either direction for a long stretch. The CB was on, low volume, mostly static with occasional scattered transmissions from trucks far enough away that the signal was broken. And then a voice came through, clear as anything, close signal, right channel. It said my truck number. Not my name. My truck number. The number painted on the side of my tractor, which at that point was a company truck with a 3-digit unit number. It said that number, clearly, in a flat voice, and then it said, "You should have turned around at the state line." That's all. Then static. I grabbed the CB and said, "Say again, who's calling?" Nothing. I asked for any traffic on the channel. Nothing for about 10 seconds, and then a driver somewhere east of me started talking about road conditions near Kearney, and the channel went back to normal. I have never been so aware of being alone in a vehicle in my life as I was in that moment. Because whoever said that, whatever said that, knew which truck I was in, knew the number, was close enough to have a strong signal, and was, as best I could tell, not on that road. I did not turn around at the state line. I drove to my destination. I delivered my load. And I have never stopped wondering what was meant by that transmission, or what might have happened if I had, in fact, turned around. Iowa cornfields at night are among the darkest places I've ever driven through. There are no mountains to give you a sense of elevation and horizon, no coastline to give you a sense of edge. It's just flat dark in every direction beyond the corridor of your headlights, and in late fall when the corn has been harvested, the fields stretch away from the road with nothing to break the view for miles. Year 8. Mid-November. I was on a County 2 lane taking a more direct route between two small towns, having come off the interstate to make a delivery to a facility that wasn't accessible from the highway. This is the kind of driving I generally disliked. 2-lane rural roads at night are harder on the nerves than the interstate, lower shoulders, more wildlife, less predictability, but sometimes the route requires it. About 10 miles outside of my destination, I noticed lights in the field to my right. Not one light. Several. Maybe 8 or 10 of them, arranged in no pattern I could make sense of, hovering about 6 or 7 feet off the ground, moving slowly through the harvested field in what seemed like a sweeping motion. The color was wrong for any agricultural equipment I'd ever seen. Not the yellow-white of work lights, not the red of tail lights. They were a blue-white that felt cold even from a distance, a color that made the surrounding darkness look even darker by contrast. I slowed down. I rolled down my window despite the cold. I could hear nothing above the engine idle and the wind. No equipment noise, no voices, nothing that would indicate a work crew out in a harvested field in the middle of the night in November in Iowa. The lights moved. Not erratically, not fast, but with a kind of methodical sweeping motion, like something searching. They crossed through the field in the direction of the road. And when they reached what I estimated was about 100 yards from the road shoulder, they stopped. All of them. At once. And for just a moment, I had the very clear and very unwelcome feeling that whatever those lights were attached to, they had noticed me. I put the window up. I put my foot down. I did not slow down again until I was inside the town limits with streetlights around me. The facility manager I delivered to the next morning was a lifelong Iowa resident. Over coffee while he signed my paperwork, I described what I'd seen, as casually as I could manage. He nodded. He said, "That stretch of road." Just that. That stretch of road. I asked him what he meant. He changed the subject. He signed my bill of lading, gave me my copy, and thanked me for the delivery. I never got an explanation. But the way he said it told me I wasn't the first person to see something out there. This is the one that I have told the fewest people about. My wife knows. My brother knows. One other driver I trust knows, and he's never questioned it, which I think says something about the kind of stories you accumulate in this profession. Year 10. March. I was running a load from Phoenix to Flagstaff, which is a beautiful drive on US 89. You climb out of the desert basin up through the high pine country, and the elevation change is dramatic and gorgeous in the daylight. At night it's darker and more enclosed, the pines coming close on both sides of the road in the upper elevation sections. I was climbing up through the canyon section, maybe 40 minutes outside of Flagstaff, when I became aware that there was someone in the passenger seat. I am going to try to be precise here because the precise detail is the disturbing part. I didn't see anyone get in the truck. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't been unconscious or asleep. I was fully awake, both hands on the wheel, watching the road through a section that required attention because of the grade and some curve work. And at some point I became aware, with absolute certainty, that the passenger seat was occupied. I did not look immediately. This is the part that I've never been able to fully explain to myself. Something stopped me from looking. Not fear, exactly, or not just fear. Something more like the feeling you get as a child when you're convinced something is in the dark corner of your room and some part of you believes that if you don't look directly at it, it won't be real. I drove for what was probably 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, fully aware of a presence in the seat to my right. The cab felt different. Colder. Not dramatically colder, but noticeably, the kind of cold you associate with a window being down except no windows were down. And there was a smell. Faint, but there. Old water, somehow. Like a river. I looked. The seat was empty. But the coldness didn't go away. Not for another 10 miles. And the whole way up to Flagstaff I drove with every light in the cab on and the radio as loud as I could stand it, and I have never taken that road at night again. Way stations are a normal and mundane part of the trucking life. You pull in, you drive over the scale, your weight registers, they wave you through or they pull you in for inspection. It is routine. It is boring. I have been through way stations hundreds of times, and the only emotion they have ever reliably produced is mild irritation at the time cost. The one in Washington State in year 11 produced something different. It was a way station on I-5 northbound, which I believe is in the Chehalis area, though I've doubted my geographic memory of that night more than once. It was late February, cold, light rain, and the station had its open sign lit. I pulled in as required. I drove over the scale. No issue with weight. The green light was on. I should have been waved through. I kept rolling slowly toward the exit and glanced over at the booth as I passed. The booth was empty. No officer inside. Which happens. Sometimes they step away. But the light was on and the sign was open and there was no indication that the station was unmanned. There was, however, a figure standing on the far side of the booth, at the edge of the lit area where the concrete met the dark of the grass beyond the station. Standing very still. Not wearing any DOT or State Patrol uniform that I could see. Just standing, at the edge of the light, looking at the lane. I rolled through to the exit road and stopped, because something made me stop. I looked back through my passenger mirror at the figure by the booth. It was still there. Still standing at the edge of the light. And as I looked, it slowly turned its head in my direction. At that distance, in the rain, I couldn't see any detail of the face. I can't tell you what I saw in that turn of the head that scared me as much as it did. But I pulled out of that exit road and got back on the interstate faster than I have moved in any non-emergency situation in my driving career. And when the next driver I ran into on the CB that night mentioned the way station, I told him it was closed. He said it had been closed for renovation for 6 weeks. The sign had been lit. The scale had been active. I drove across it and something registered on that scale and the light turned green. And the station had been closed for 6 weeks. I've sat with this one longer than any of the others. Because of all the things I've experienced, this one has the most concrete detail and the least satisfying explanation. Year 12. Late July. I was running a night load westbound across Texas on US 90, which is one of those roads that goes through small towns. Real small towns, population a few hundred, a gas station and a diner and a grain elevator and a church, and that's the entirety of it. I knew that road. I'd run it several times. At about 3 in the morning, I drove through a town I didn't recognize. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know Texas has a lot of small towns, and it's possible to miss one on a road you think you know. But I had run US 90 through this section at least 4 times previously, and the gaps between towns were familiar to me in the way that any road you've driven repeatedly becomes familiar. And this town appeared where there had not been a town before. It had lights. A main street running off the highway to the left. Maybe 4 blocks visible before it ended at dark. Buildings that looked like a hardware store, a barber shop, what might have been a small hotel. A water tower at the far end, dark, no name visible. A gas station on the corner that had an old pump style, the rounded top kind that I associate with photographs of the 1950s rather than with anything still in operation. The gas station had a light on inside. I could see through the window. I did not stop. Something about the whole thing felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with any specific frightening detail. It felt wrong the way a room feels wrong when you walk into it and you can't identify why. Just an ambient wrongness. I drove through it in maybe 45 seconds and then it was behind me and there was dark highway again. When I got to my destination and had downtime, I tried to find that town on every map I could access. Texas Highway 90, the section I'd been on. The towns are documented. There are not that many of them. The town I drove through matches nothing I found. No name. No record. No geographic feature where it would have been. I've looked more than once. I've looked in historical records because I thought maybe it was a ghost town in the truer sense, a once inhabited place. The geography doesn't support it. The most frightening thought I've had about it, the one I come back to and wish I didn't, is, what would have happened if I'd stopped for gas? Mountain passes in winter are humbling. I don't care how many years you've been driving, how confident you are in your equipment, how good your chains are. A mountain pass at night in a Colorado winter puts you in your place very quickly. You are a machine navigating geography that does not care about you, and your full attention is required at all times. I was westbound on US 160 over Wolf Creek Pass in December, year 13. Heavy snow, visibility poor, road plowed but snow-covered, and I was running slow and careful the way you do. The pass peaks at just over 10,000 feet, and the grades coming down the west side are significant. I had my engine brake working, my speed down, my following distance immense because with low visibility you give yourself every inch of room you can. About halfway down the western descent, standing at the side of the road, not at the edge of the cliff, not at the guardrail, but right at the edge of the lane, was a man. No coat, no hat, no visible cold weather gear of any kind. In December, at 10,000 feet, in a snowstorm, he was just standing there, watching the road. He turned as I passed, and I saw his face briefly in my headlights as I went by, the way you sometimes catch a face in the light for a fraction of a second. It was calm, expressionless, not distressed, not cold-looking, not anything I could name. Just an absence of expression that felt wrong. I got on the CB and announced a pedestrian on the westbound side of Wolf Creek Pass at my approximate milepost. Other drivers acknowledged. A driver behind me said he'd watch for it. About 3 minutes later, he came back on and said he didn't see anything on the road at the location I described. There are no structures in that area. No pullouts close to that location where a vehicle could have been parked. The temperature that night was in the low single digits. A human being in a t-shirt and jeans, because that's what he'd appeared to be wearing, would have been in serious hypothermia risk within minutes. I filed a report when I got to my destination. No search and rescue activity was initiated in that area from what I could find out. No body was found. Nobody matching that description was reported missing. He was just there, and then he wasn't, and the mountain kept its secrets. I don't know what I saw in Mississippi in year 14. I want to be clear about that up front, because with most of the other experiences in this video, I can at least describe what they resembled. A person, a light, a vehicle. What I saw in the median of I-20 in Mississippi at 4 in the morning does not cleanly resemble anything. It was large. My best estimate is 8 or 9 feet at whatever passed for its highest point, though the shape was not consistent with any animal or structure I can name. It was in the median, the grassy divider between eastbound and westbound lanes, and it was moving. Not running, not walking, but moving in a way that didn't match any locomotion I'm familiar with, a kind of lateral flowing movement that seemed almost like it was navigating water rather than grass, except there was no water. The color was dark, very dark, nearly black, but it had a quality in my headlights that wasn't quite black. Like something very dark that was also slightly wrong in its reflectivity. My headlights hit it and something came back, but it wasn't quite reflection in the normal sense. It crossed the median, from the westbound side to the eastbound side, moving in that strange lateral way, and as I drew parallel to it, the thing I will never forget is that it stopped. It stopped moving mid-crossing, and it did what I can only describe as orienting toward me. Whatever passed for its facing direction shifted toward my truck. I don't know that it had eyes. I didn't see eyes. But the shift in orientation was unmistakable. It was aware of me. I held my lane and my speed through what felt like several seconds of that experience, and then it was behind me, and I was shaking badly enough that I came off the interstate at the next exit and sat in a gas station parking lot for an hour before I could trust my hands on the wheel. I have never spoken publicly about what I saw in that median. I'm speaking about it now because it happened, and it was real, and I'm tired of carrying things that happened and were real without ever saying so. I don't know what it was. I don't have a framework for it. I have 20 years of practical, concrete experience with the physical world, and what I saw in that Mississippi median does not fit anywhere in that experience. I've accepted that some things don't fit. It hasn't made me feel better about it. Kansas at night is a lot like Nebraska at night, but flatter, which you wouldn't think was possible until you experience it. I-70 westbound across Kansas after dark is one of the most genuinely isolating drives in the country. The towns are far apart. The land is so flat that on a clear night you can see the lights of a town 40 miles ahead and spend an hour reaching it. It should feel like progress, but it often feels like running on a treadmill. Year 15. October. I was heading west on I-70 and I was scanning the AM dial out of boredom. This was a habit I'd kept from my early years, and I landed on a station that was coming in very clearly, stronger signal than anything else on the dial. It was playing music. Old music, very old, the kind of big band sound that I associate with recordings from the 1930s or 40s, the quality of it slightly compressed and tinny the way those old recordings sound. Between songs, a male announcer came on with a very formal mid-century broadcast style, the kind of voice you'd hear in a newsreel, and he gave a brief weather report. For a city I'd never heard of. He gave the forecast for temperatures, precipitation, and wind conditions for this city, mentioned it by name, a name I couldn't find when I later looked, and referenced local street conditions in the downtown district and advised residents on road preparations for the evening. And then another song started. I sat with this for several minutes, trying to figure out what I was listening to. A nostalgia station. A historical recreation. A college radio project. All of those felt possible until the announcer came back between the next two songs and gave a news brief. Local news. The kinds of items that would have been local news in the 1940s. A city council meeting. A ribbon cutting at a new business. A report on agricultural commodity prices from the county exchange. All of it present tense. All of it current. All of it for a city I couldn't find. I noted the frequency. When I got to a truck stop, I looked it up. The frequency was licensed to a contemporary country music station based in a Kansas town I know by name. I've driven through it. I've gotten fuel there. It plays contemporary country music. It does not play 1940s big band, and it does not have a formal announcer who reads local news in the style of a wartime radio broadcast. I still have the frequency written down. It's in the same place I keep the receipt from Wyoming. There is a particular bridge in Kentucky over a river that I am going to describe without naming because I drove over it regularly for years and I don't want to give it whatever attention might come from me naming it. It's a significant crossing, one of those older bridges with a long approach, and beneath it the river is wide and dark and slow-moving, and there are concrete support structures that disappear into the water without much fanfare. I crossed this bridge regularly for several years as part of a regional circuit I was running in year 16. And one night I looked over the railing from the height of the bridge during a slow crossing due to construction equipment on the deck, and I saw something under the bridge. Specifically, I saw something on one of the concrete support pillars. Clinging to it, the way a person might cling to something if they were caught in a current, except there was no current to speak of. This was a slow, flat river. Whatever was on that pillar was there by choice or by nature, not by accident. It was large, human in shape, but wrong in all the same ways that shape in Mississippi was wrong, and in the way the hitchhiker in New Mexico was wrong. Too long in certain places. Too still in a way that living things, whether resting or otherwise, aren't quite still. The color was the color of the concrete and the dark water combined, a gray-green that would have made it invisible except for the angle and the construction floodlights that were illuminating the underside of the bridge from barges below. It was looking up at the bridge. At the underside of the deck I was driving across. at the trucks and the construction equipment and whatever it sees when it looks at the world above the waterline. I crossed the bridge and did not stop and did not look back, and at the next opportunity rerouted myself around that particular crossing for the remaining time I ran that circuit. My dispatcher thought it was a road condition preference. I didn't correct him. I've heard other drivers mention that bridge. Not in the context of anything paranormal, just in passing, the way drivers mention landmarks. But once or twice I've heard something in the way a specific driver said it, a small hesitation, a change of tone, that made me think I wasn't the only one who'd looked over that railing at the wrong moment. I'm going to tell you about something that is simple in its description, and I think possibly the strangest thing that has happened to me in 20 years. Not the most frightening moment, just the strangest. Year 17. March. I was westbound on US 50 in Nevada, which is officially designated as the loneliest road in America, which is a title I would not contest. It is 400 miles of largely unbroken desert with small towns so far apart that you plan your fuel stops with the same care you'd give to a remote wilderness expedition. There is no cell service for long stretches. The radio is mostly static. It is exactly the kind of road where you spend quality time with your own thoughts whether you want or not. I passed mile marker 147. I noted it the way you note mile markers when you're on an unfamiliar road and counting down to something. The next marker was 148, then 149, then 150, then 147. I looked at it as I passed, certain I'd misread. I kept driving. 148, 149, 150, then 147. The third time I passed mile marker 147, I stopped the truck. I stopped in the lane because there was nothing behind me for as far as I could see, and I needed to stop and think about what was happening. I sat there and looked at my odometer. The miles were adding up correctly. I was moving forward. I had been moving forward continuously. My fuel was dropping as it should for the distance I'd covered. My HOS clock was recording the time as it should. I took a photograph of the marker with my phone. I have that photograph. It says 147. I kept driving. The markers continued correctly from that point. 148, 149, and on. I never passed 147 again. I covered the rest of that road without incident. I reached my destination, delivered my load, drove home. When I got home, I looked up everything I could find about US 50 in Nevada and mile marker 147. There are stories about that road, a lot of them, because it is the kind of road that generates stories. Some of those stories involve strange repetitions, loops, a feeling of the road folding back on itself. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if those stories are real accounts or the kind of legend that accumulates around a road with a name like the loneliest road in America. I know what my odometer said. I know what my eyes saw. I have a photograph with a timestamp. And I have no explanation. This one is brief in its description, and I think that brevity is part of what makes it stay with me. Year 18. December. I was parked at a rest area in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, on US 2, waiting out a weather window before pushing through to my delivery. Upper Peninsula winters are not gentle, and I'd made the decision to sleep a few hours in the bunk rather than push through in deteriorating conditions. Smart call, and I'd have made it again. I was in the bunk. I was not asleep. I'm a light sleeper in the truck, always have been. The sounds of the parking area keep part of my attention running. I was in that state between rest and sleep, not quite one and not quite the other. And I heard my name. Spoken. Outside the truck. A voice, not loud, not a shout, the volume of a normal conversation if someone were standing very close to the driver's door. It said my name the way someone who knows you says it. Not as a question, not as a summons. Just my name. As a statement. I lay completely still. I know what sleep state auditory events feel like. I've had hypnagogic experiences, those sounds or voices you sometimes hear in the space between waking and sleeping that your brain generates. This was not that. I was not anywhere near sleep when I heard it. I was resting but aware. I lay still for about 30 seconds. I heard nothing else. I climbed into the cab, turned on everything, checked all my mirrors. The rest area was dark and quiet. 3 other trucks parked, all buttoned up, no activity. Snow on the ground undisturbed around my truck. Nobody was standing at my door. Nobody had been standing at my door. My name. In a voice I didn't recognize. In a rest area in the Upper Peninsula in December, with snow on the ground that would have shown footprints. I drove through the rest of that night. I started this video with a story about a woman on an overpass in Ohio. I want to end the stories with one more, because in year 19, on I-71 in Ohio, I saw her again. Or I saw something that I believe was connected to what I saw in year 1. And whether that connection is real or the pattern-seeking of a brain that had stored that original experience for 18 years, I can't say with certainty. It was April, early morning, just after 4. The sky was starting to lighten at the horizon but hadn't committed to dawn yet, that specific pre-dawn gray that changes how everything looks. I was northbound on I-71, not the same direction as the first time, and I couldn't be certain it was the same overpass, but the general area was right. I saw her on the overpass railing before I fully processed what I was seeing. White dress. Dark hair. Standing on the outside of the railing. Facing me. I went to my brakes. I held my horn. I watched as I approached. And this time was different from year 1 in one specific way that I've thought about hundreds of times since. This time, she raised one hand. Not a wave. Not a gesture of distress. Just a slow, deliberate raising of one hand to approximately shoulder height. Fingers spread. Palm outward. I drove under the overpass. I looked in my mirror immediately. She was not visible above me in the structure. She was not falling. She was not on the road on either side. I pulled over. I got out. I looked back at the overpass for a long time. Nothing. Whatever she is, whoever she is, she has been on that road since at least my year 1. She has been there for at minimum 19 years of my driving life. Other drivers may have seen her long before me. Others may have seen her since. I don't know what she is or what she wants or whether the hand she raised meant anything at all. But I think about her. I think about her when I'm on that stretch of road. And I think about the question I've never been able to answer about any of these experiences. Are they warnings or just witnesses? Is the strangeness out there something that's happening to us or something that's always been there and occasionally, in the particular conditions of the road, the exhaustion, the solitude, the dark, the specific attentiveness that long-haul driving produces in the brain, we're simply close enough to see it? I don't have an answer. I'm not sure the answer is mine to have. 20 years. 11 encounters that I've told you about tonight, and a handful more that I've kept back because either the description fails me or the memory is still too close to the nerve. 1.5 million hours of road time, give or take, a significant portion of it in the dark, in the quiet, in the strange compression of attention that comes from being alone with a machine and a job in the middle of the American night. Do I believe in the paranormal? I didn't when I started driving. I wanted not to believe in it by year 5. I couldn't honestly say I didn't believe by year 10. By year 20, what I believe is this: there are things in this country, on these roads, in the night, that do not fit the model of the world I was given growing up. That doesn't mean I know what they are. That doesn't mean they're supernatural in any framework I can clearly define. It means that the world is wider and stranger and less resolved than we tend to pretend it is. I also believe this. The road at night has a specific quality that may make us more receptive to things that are always present but usually invisible. The fatigue, the isolation, the high alert that long-haul driving produces. There's research suggesting that the driver's brain in the later hours of a run is in a state that has some structural similarities to certain meditative states, certain altered states, the way that rhythm and repetition and a narrowed sensory environment can shift perception. I don't say that to explain away what happened to me. I say it because I think it's relevant. I think the road makes us more permeable to whatever is out there, and I think what is out there is more than we're typically willing to account for. I kept driving because the road is my life, and because being afraid of something doesn't mean you have to run from it. I kept driving because every strange and inexplicable thing I've encountered on that road has been outnumbered by the ordinary and the beautiful and the human. More sunrises than ghosts. More conversations at truck stops than voices on the CB I couldn't explain. More miles of just road and sky and the peaceful monotony of a job I'm good at than miles that asked me a question I couldn't answer. But the questions are real. The things I've seen are real. And if you're a driver, or if you spend time on the road at night, and you've seen things you've never told anyone because you were afraid of how it would sound, I understand. I've been carrying most of this for 20 years. Sometimes it helps to just say, I was there. I saw it. I don't know what it was. And I kept driving anyway. Stay safe out there. Keep your eyes open. And maybe, sometimes, don't look too long in the mirrors.